Hello, this is God7, and today I am going to tell you how to make custom cutscenes for Super Mario 64 DS. And now you're probably asking, but Gada, you've done this before. Well, yes, but it hasn't been the true modern tutorial about cutscenes, and it really was not all too informative. So I'm going to show you right here, right now, the right way to make your custom cutscenes. So the first thing you're going to need is Super Mario 64 DSe, the latest version called Super Mario 64 DSe Ultimate on my GitHub. There's a link in the description below. And you're also going to need an unmodified, clean European Mario 64 DS ROM, and you're also going to need ASM Patches.rar. Now, this is kind of an optional step, but highly recommended. Now I'm just going to show you what to do with the ASM Patches.rar before I explain what it's all about. So in here you have an XDelta UI and an XDelta patch. Now you're going to want to run the UI app and apply the patch. The patch file is the XDelta Here. The source file is your clean ROM. The output file is, I'm just going to do cutscene test.nds. Of course, you can name it whatever you want and hit patch. And if your ROM was 100% clean European version run ROM, this should happen. If not, then you need to go get yourself a clean ROM. If you have opened the ROM in Mario 64 DSe or New Super Mario Bros. E, then that's not a clean ROM, as those editors will modify the ROM. Now once that's done, you can X out of that. I actually do not need these anymore, and I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. But now you're probably wondering why go through the trouble of applying a patch to a clean ROM. And I'm going to tell you right now. So in Mario 64 DSe, you can apply DL patches for dynamic libraries and a patch for suitability with New Super Mario Bros. E ASM hacking. And I have them both enabled on this NDS file. Now you're probably wondering why that I went through the effort of providing my own patch if you can just click both the buttons right here. And the reason I did that is there's a certain kind of method in order to clicking the buttons in the right order to get it working on the official hardware without it crashing. Because you can actually do everything completely right and have your cutscenes crash on the official hardware because of how patches work. It's tricky to get them both working at the same time, but once you do it, you're set. So now, anytime you inject custom code with the New Super Mario Bros. E patcher or use dynamic libraries, you can be certain that it hasn't been the patching process that has caused your code to crash their official hardware, or the patching in general. But now it's time we go into the true tutorial of the video, what it's all about, and that is making your custom cutscenes. So first thing I'm going to do is the easy warp that I always do, just a simple warp to go somewhere. And in this case, I'm going to have a warp to go to Bob on Battlefield, you know, exit. Simple enough. I have tutorials explaining exits and entrances and such in my YouTube channel, so be sure to check them out. And I'm just going to have this lead to Bob on Battlefield, something simple like that. I'm going to save it, and that's it. And next, what we're actually going to do is modify the file system to add a cutscene file. So I'm going to go to Tools, Edit File System. And what this is a file system editor Josh made that you can actually add your own files to the ROM. Now I'm going to add a directory, just going to call it cutscene, hit OK. And then here I'm going to add a file. Now you're going to want to have your cutscene file here, and I'm just going to have a dummy cutscene.dkl. You can name it whatever you want, just be sure to name the extension DKL. It won't crash and burn if you don't have that as the name, but it's highly recommended because that's the proper extension. Now I'm just going to say FF at the end of this file, Of course, I just need to give it some form of information so that Super Mario 64 DSe will import the file. But after you do that with a hex editor, I used HXD for that. You can see it's 1 bytes. That's not correct grammar, but whatever, Windows. Just going to add the dummy cutscene.dkl. I highly recommend to name cutscenes after what you want, and then after you do that, hit Save Changes. And now if you look into the file system, you can see here that you have your dummy cutscene. Now I'm going to go into Bob on Battlefield, and this is where the fun happens. You're going to have the DLs, and you're going to go to Data, Cutscene, Dummy Cutscene.dkl, hit Add, Save. After you do that, make sure you X out of everything. Because if you use that save button after hitting save on DLs, that will overwrite your DL settings. Now I'm going to go ahead and explain what DLs, or dynamic libraries, are, if you noticed that when I was adding it. What a dynamic library is you can think of it as almost a DLL file, but for Super Mario 64 DS. It's code that you can just load anytime from the file system. It doesn't matter where you load it necessarily. Maybe it does, I don't know. But what I'm saying is you can just have any code in the file system and have the game load it. And what I'm saying is for the game to load our dummy cutscene.dkl. And I'll explain in detail what DKLs are in a second, but for now I'm just going to go out of that. And I'm going to go to Tools, the Kappa script editor. Kappa script is the name of cutscenes in Mario 64 DS. It's not an official name by all means, it's just what I call it. Because that's a cool name for a scripting language, Kappa meaning Bowser. And let's face it, Bowser script sounds powerful and awesome. And it's true, because Kappa script really is a powerful and awesome language you can use with this game. The next thing I'm going to want to do is open Bob on Battlefield. Alright, so now let me show you the basic controls of the Kappa script editor. We have here an edit menu that allows you to uncomment the current line or comment it. You have an open button, an import button, export, save, save as, and close. And then you have some options in the bottom. But first I'm going to tackle what the file menu does. What the open button does is you simply open the cutscene in the file system. Cutscene. And obviously it's a bad instruction because, you know, it's not meant to be that. And then after that, you have your cutscene open. If you close it, you will close your cutscene. If you save as, you will save your cutscene as a file and start saving it to that external file instead. But I'm not going to do that, and save will do that. But if you try and saving, you can see it gives an error, and I'll explain that in a second. So what import does is it imports a KPS file. A KPS file is a Kappa script raw text file, and a DKL file is almost like a DLL but for Kappa script, and a bin file is just raw Kappa script by itself. I'm going to go into more detail, of course, about that in a second, but let's explain what the output KPS is and the KPL is. So over here is what's called the KPL, or Kappa script library. Kappa script is an assembled language that represents a bytecode or so. If you don't know what that means, it's not too important. Basically what it means is it takes these instructions here and it converts them to bytes, and then when you open a file, it takes the bytes and it converts them back to these simplified instructions on the right. And you can actually modify this file on the right, say change the name of instructions, because honestly the instructions names are not really important, it's the raw bytes that they get translated to, that is. And of course I wouldn't mess around with the parameters, because obviously if you're changing the music, there's only going to be four bytes for whatever the new music ID is, and that's it. And then you have some options here, like when you save the cutscene, you can open the ROM, and save KPS saves the KPS file when you save the cutscene. And so what you're going to want to do is change output KPS, and you're going to say cutscene test.kps. Of course, you name it whatever you want, but that's why I'm going to save it. And if you hit save KPL, that'll save this file on the right. In most cases, unless you're researching cutscenes or want to change names to make them easier for you, then you never will typically want to mess with that. And this is just for simplicity's sake, it's nothing really important. Export will just currently export the whatever file, and import will import the file. So now that we have our basic script, the simplest thing to do is, in order to make the cutscene work, you have to do end, and that's it. That's the simplest cutscene you're allowed to have. I believe if you don't have that, it will just crash. And I'm going to hit open ROM on save. Let's look at how it looks in game. And you can see here it does absolutely nothing. But one thing you probably noticed is the music did not load, and we're just kind of left with silence. And now we're going to write our first Kappa script instruction, the change music command, because obviously we want to have music in the level when the real thing ends. So in order to do that, let's just copy over this byte, change music, and this is going to be the general syntax of how a command works. And then here we have a bracket for the new music ID. In this case, it's 4 bytes. That's what the 4 means. You typically don't need to worry about that. And then there's the number of the music you want to play. And then what you do is you follow this by a colon and the frame you want to run this on. I'm just going to say frame 1, like that. And now what this does is this will change the music to 0 and run it on frame 1, and then end the cutscene. Except you don't want to just have it like that. You need to go to the level settings to do the proper sequence. In this case it'd be 58. So 58 is the SSEQ ID and the SDAT file for music. There's a music tutorial somewhere on my channel if you want to look at that for having custom music and such and editing it. And in this case, it's just going to play the bob-omb foul field music. So I'm going to see what it does in game. Alright, now you can see that we have music and the cutscene. Now obviously this is the most boring cutscene in the world because we essentially did nothing in the grand scheme of things. But now we're going to make things interesting because we have a lot of instructions at our disposal. Now the first thing that we want to do is going to make a camera that's up here to look at this bridge. Let's just say we want to do that, okay? For the sake of tutorial. Now I'm just going to put here end the cutscene. That is why you want KPS files. Because when you save KPS files, it also saves the spacing and comments. Whereas if you were to just go back and import your cutscene, you wouldn't have all the comments, and that would be annoying if you wanted. And that would be annoying if you like organization. So that's why it is how it is. And what I'm going to do to place the camera is I want to set the camera target in position. The target is what the camera looks at, and the position is where the camera is. So I'm just going to copy this over and set camera. And you can see we have 6 2-byte parameters. So I'm just going to do that at the moment. And let's just say I want to run this as frame 1. And so let's say here, set the camera target in position. And we see here that the parameters say X target, Y target, Z target, X position, Y position, and Z position in FXU. So what that means is it's basically coordinates of the target then followed by the coordinates of what we're looking at. So I'm going to go ahead and place a junk object, camera tag, Sure, why not? Now, the fact that camera is in the name of this object is purely coincidental. In fact, you don't even want to save the game once you place the object, actually, because that might actually mess things up on your world, because I don't want a camera tag on Battlefield, so I'm not going to save this. I'm just using this as a dummy for the coordinates. And the target is what I'm looking at, and I want to look at this bridge, in which case I'm just going to copy the parameters down. X, Y, Z, followed by the coordinates of where my camera is, or this thing right here. So I'm just going to copy the coordinates here, copy them here, then copy them here. Alright, and now let's save it. And it's yelling at me saying that this is invalid. And why it is invalid is these are actually 2-byte numbers and they don't have decimal points, but the editor gives us decimal points. Well, here's the thing, this is actually supposed to be negative 3,486, but the editor tells us that's negative 3.486. And the reason why it does that is it divides everything by 1,000 for some reason. So in order to combat that, we just multiply everything by 1,000. In this case, we just move the decimal here. We just remove the decimal here. Because 7.7 times 1,000 is 700. 1 times 1,000 is 1,000, and you get the point. It's just simple decimal numbers, so you can just change that. Go. Alright, so now that you saw what it did, you're probably wondering, wait, that wasn't looking at the bridge, but the camera was different. And the reason for that is, yeah, it was different, but the thing is, even though we were looking at the camera, we were only doing it for 1 frame, and then we just immediately ended the cutscene. So what we need to do is wait a bit before ending the cutscene. So what I mean by that is, instead of changing the music at the beginning, what if we just wait till the end to change the music? And Mario 64 DS runs at 30 frames a second. That means there's 30 frames in a second. So if I have a value of 30, that'd be 1 second past the cutscene start, 60, 2 seconds, and so on. So I just want to end the cutscene 3 seconds in, so that'll be a value of 90. And here's a trivia question. If I do this command and then I do the number 1, which one do you think will run first, the top one or the bottom? Now, if you're used to scripting languages, you would naturally think this one would run first, but that's not true in this case. This one actually runs first. The reason why that is this runs on frame 1, while this runs at frame 90. Also, one thing to be sure of, never run anything on frame 0. That will crash on regular DS hardware for some reason. I'm not sure why that is, but it does. So once that's done, I can save it. And you can see it did exactly what I wanted to. It looked at the bridge for 3 seconds, and then it went immediately to Mario as it changed the music once again as it ended the cutscene. Obviously that sounds a bit weird, so maybe I'd want to replace this, change music with something else at the end. And there's plenty of good options to do. What I'm going to do for that is actually do a command to fade to black and back. It's kind of like my favorite command to do when a cutscene ends. And a cool shortcut is, even though there's an empty bracket, you don't have to do empty brackets for cutscene commands that don't need it. So you can just do it like that, and it will compile just fine. Alright, and as you can see, it did exactly what I told it to. Sure, the camera moves a bit at the end, but honestly, if I were to wait a bit more to end the cutscene or do some sort of wait or delay command or whatever, then that wouldn't be much of a problem. So now you're probably wondering why the bridge didn't show. And the reason for that is it was too far away from the camera to view due to the far clip plane. There's that and the fact that some enemies just don't spawn by the time the cutscene runs, as in the cutscene runs before certain objects spawn. But obviously just having the camera in one place is boring, so we want to do something a lot more interesting, and we have a ton of camera commands to play at. We can just adjust the camera FOV, do adjustments to FOV over time, we can reset the camera to the pause menu, we can do things like spin the camera target, which would mean like, see this thing we're looking at, we would spin it around and essentially be spinning around our field of view because we're constantly changing what we're looking at. And then we can adjust a bunch of things like here. I'm just going to do something simple here, which would be adjusting the camera position over decay or exponential decay. And in the process, I'm going to introduce you to some new syntax. I'm just going to say, for simplicity, we want the camera to approach the bridge. So I'm just going to copy the coordinates of the bridge. And then if I look over here, the next variables are the approach X, Y, and Z. And I kind of think of those as speeds. In that case, I'm just going to set everything to 10. But here's the thing. When we're adjusting the camera position, we want it to run over a bunch of frames. It would be kind of silly to say, hey, only move the camera for one frame. So what we're going to do is adjust it during multiple frames. So from frame 2 to, I don't know, like 150, we're going to say the camera should move towards the bridge. And to combat that, we're also going to say this happens at frame 150. And what this syntax means is this runs from frame 2 to 150. If you do a single number, it only runs for a single frame. This is actually the same as this, as it's still only running from frame 1 to 1. It's just, I usually just do one number for shorthand and it looks cleaner. You can also only do one range. Like doing a range like that won't compile and makes no sense whatsoever. So once you do that, save it. And it's yelling at me. And you're probably wondering why it doesn't work, and the reason why is because this shouldn't be a parenthesis, this should be a bracket. Be sure to catch yourself with silly mistakes like that. Alright, and that's how our cutscene looks. Of course it's a bit weird, but hey, whatever, it doesn't really matter. And in order to make the camera not look so choppy, we can make it so that the camera fades sooner so that it doesn't just immediately cut. But that's pretty much how camera commands work. You just run them through a range. But let's do something a bit more interesting called with player instructions. Now let's just say I want to do some cutscene stuff with Luigi. So I'm just going to have, if you remember, I set the camera target here, but let's just say I want the camera tag over here somewhere. Well, not camera tag, but camera in general. I'm just going to copy the coordinates. Remember that the position is here. And remember to get rid of all the division, so by multiplying by 1,000. And then I'm just going to remove this line right here for now. And there's also a way to span this out by doing an instruction that does nothing. So if I do an instruction that does nothing at frame 150, that'll make it so that the camera just kind of stays put, I guess. And I'm going to make a new section for player stuff. And so to spawn a player, what we need to do is OR the player flags. So what we do is do it here. I'm not sure if this actually spawns the player or not, but that's what it does, and I'm just going to run at frame 1. But here's the thing. How does this know what player to do? With player commands, we use these curly brackets, and you can do Luigi, Yoshi, Mario, or Wario. Or you can do the number versions from 0 to 3 if you feel fancy, with 0 being Mario, 1 being Luigi, 2 being Wario, and 3 being Yoshi. Although I'm just going to do that, but let's say we want to place Luigi over here. We don't want Luigi to be floating or so. So let's just kind of put him here. Here's the thing, when you spawn a player though, they have a tendency to jump. Or maybe that's what the OR player flags do. I'm just going to drop them on the ground and see. That's the beautiful things about cutscenes. You just play around with them and see what happens. And of course we need the parameters, which case will be the position. Oh, you can see it's yelling at me. And let's figure out why. Oh, we specified the position, but it also wants the angle. So let's just give it an angle of 0. Why not? What an angle is also is a special units. That's 2 bytes, where 0 is 0 degrees, and 0x4000 is 90 degrees, 0x8000 is 180 degrees, and so on. The beautiful thing is once you reach the maximum 0xFFFF of a 2-byte number, you'll overflow to the next letter or number, which would be 0, causing a complete 360. You can see we have Luigi, but the text spawns anyway. And we actually just kind of ripped our cutscene. You also have to be sure you do some cool things with here. Maybe I need to get rid of the NOP cam for saying whatever in this situation. And let's just see what happens if I get rid of the OR player flags. You can just keep playing around with cutscenes till you get what you want. And you can see that Luigi just didn't spawn, so I was right in the OR player flags, not spawning Luigi. So it's important to do that. Now, there's a ton of other commands you can do, like play player voice, or animate the player cap, or even hurt the player. I'm just going to hurt the player for some reason. Sorry, Luigi. And what the kill player does is it makes it so they disappear. If you don't kill them, they'll just disappear at the end of the cutscene anyway. Alright, and you can see that kind of froze again. I'm not completely sure why it's freezing. If I had to guess, it would be because of this fading with the text box. So it just kind of gets confused again. So it's a matter of trial and error, of just playing around with things, seeing what works or not. And I recommend once you're done with the cutscene, you set the camera over where the original view is, so it'd be like ending the cutscene as normal. And that's about it for all you need to know about Kappa script. And I'll get over how to run those in a second. Now you're probably wondering the details of the difference between decal and bin. So what the bin is, it's what Kappa script assembles into. That's the bytecode that the game runs. By itself, it does nothing. But what DKLs do, they're actually code files, dynamic libraries that can include Kappa script bins inside them that kind of execute it. Think of them almost as self-extracting WinRAR archives or so. You double-click the exe and it just extracts itself. It's kind of like this in Mario 64 DS, except with Kappa script. And there's just one more thing I want to go over, which is the save command. And now I'm going to show you what this thing does. What this does is something that tells the DKL file to, hey, you on the save file for byte number 43, if bit 2 is 0, then run the cutscene. If it is 1, then don't run the cutscene. And after the cutscene is ran, it will set the bit on this byte of the save file to 1. Now I'm going to send the save file specification in the description below so you can see the free bytes you can play around with when setting up these cutscenes, because obviously it'd be kind of silly to modify a byte that, say, uses a star or whatever for a cutscene. That'd be a glitch that you don't want, most likely. Now what this is going to do is going to run the cutscene only once before I save. Then once I save the game, it's not going to run it again. You can see that our cutscene ran. And I'm going to go exit the course. And now when I enter Mob on Battlefield again, it did not run the Kappa script once again because the save flag told it not to. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I know it's been a while since my last one, but I hope you all learned something today, and I shall see you all later.